Here's how I thought about having Ryan on. I'm last night. I went into my bookcase for a book I was looking at, and Ryan's book fell out, Scribe, and I said, I got to get Ryan on and talk to him. I haven't talked to him in a long time. And then that's when I called my guys today and said, get Bob Ryan on. So we got him, and here he is. Bob, welcome. How are you?
Hey, a long time no talk, Mike. Thank you.
How you doing?
My wife and I are fine. So far, so good. We're both huge readers, which is a huge benefit in this times, and that's a good starting point. I must tell you, I'm addicted to Sirius XM radio for some music, and we're doing the requisite amount of watching the TV, whether it's the sports things or whether it's all the available things. There's so much available. Nobody can complain. Anybody's bored, they're really in trouble. There's always something to do.
I saw Ozark's very good. I have to admit, I watched that. I don't like to recommend a lot of TV, but I watched that. It's really good, well written. A strange show, though, not for the kids, but very interesting.
Yeah, my wife's watched that.
Yes, very good.
I'm aware of it.
What would you recommend that you read recently?
Well, okay. Three things I just knocked off. One was The Last Hope Island, which is about the expatriate governments from Europe during World War II that centered in London, which includes France, but includes many of the other countries in Europe with their heads of state all relocated to London, and how they were able to help in the war effort, and in particular the great effort of the Polish pilots, without which the RAF would never have gotten done what it got done. There was one book. Number two was a book called Dear Successor, and it's about Kim Jong-un, and it's a very interesting insight into the whole whys and wherefores of North Korea, the history, how this dynasty came about. And by the way, we all know tangentially that Kim Jong-un loves basketball. You don't know how much he loves basketball. It's his infatuation with basketball is really phenomenal. And then it gets into the whole Rodman thing and how it came about. And I just got through reading The Soul of America by John Meacham, which I think ought to be read by every member of Congress, particularly those with an R in front of their state affiliation.
Yes, very thoughtful man who we see on TV all the time. He's on MSNBC almost every morning.
So that's what I just put that one to rest about 20 minutes ago, Mike. So I'm plowing through, and I'm just waiting to get to a sport. I got plenty of sports books on deck too, but I haven't done a sports book for a while.
And it's funny, folks. Bob and I have both obviously been both fixtures in our cities for many years. But what people don't realize is Bob was from Boston College, was a very close friend and roommate of a guy who actually was an enormous part of my career, Kevin O'Malley, who brought me to CBS back in 1980. So that long ago, and I actually did my interview at Runyon's, where Kevin held court, and that's where we met.
Great, and by the way, the R.I.P. Mr. Healy, who passed away, the great
Joe Healy,
co-owner
absolutely,
of Runyon's, the great Mr. Healy. Kevin and I spoke not too long ago, about 3 or 4 days ago. He lives now in the Tampa area. In fact, we were best friends at college and the best men at each other's wedding, 19 years apart.
So the CBS gets the NCAA tournament, and had never done basketball in like 20-something years. So they brought me in to work with the people, including Brett Musburger and their producers and directors who had not done college basketball. And our first tournament was North Carolina, Georgetown, which is how I got to CBS all those many years ago. So there's a connection there, obviously.
You guys got an Emmy for that, too, I believe,
yes,
for that production.
Well, listen, and Bob Fishman, who was always great to me from the beginning, who was a great director. And it's funny, the other day, Bob, I happened on, and what's on, I get the second half on CBS. I didn't realize it was on. It's NC State and Houston, which is my second tournament with CBS, okay, in Albuquerque, with Jimmy V, as you remember. And the thing that jumped out at me, I sat there and it was just starting the second half, and they played it like it was real with commercials and everything else. Yeah. And watching it, you're still stunned how NC State ever won that game, considering how good Houston was. And then what jumps off jumps off the screen is how good Olajuwon was. I mean, he's even so much better than I even remember. He was so talented. It almost jumped off the screen how talented he was in that game. I mean,
Yeah, no,
how quick he had
you're
come.
right. He was obviously one of the handful of greatest centers of all time. He had that great, incredible footwork, which is part of the from a soccer background back home, of course. You mentioned Bob Fishman. I have to tell you, I went to Lawrenceville School in Lawrenceville, New Jersey, and I was the sports editor of the school paper. My successor was Bob Fishman, and it was
Really?
this very sports knowledgeable kid. You know, he was born and raised in the Virgin Islands.
In the Virgin Islands, his family was a very big, very prominent family in the Virgin Islands.
Yeah,
yes.
But he was a huge sports fan, and I gave him my imprimatur, if you will, and he became Bob Fishman, the great director of basketball and horse racing, and one of the all-time great directors. So yeah, that's my connection. So the world can get very small at times, Mike.
Well, when you realize it, you talked in your book Scribe about going to Boston College and the kind of kids that came from the same background as you, and you even mentioned in the first lines a school that my kids are both, one's in and one's going to, and that's Chaminade. I have one that's in ninth grade and one going into ninth grade next year at Chaminade. So I have one and a daughter at Marymount, and who's a freshman at Marymount in the city, and I have she's a twin, and my son plays football at Chaminade and baseball, and although their baseball season got canceled, and a younger one who's in eighth grade who's going into Chaminade next year. So you mentioned Chaminade prominently right in the beginning of the book, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, New Hyde Park. And my friend, the reason for that was one of my classmates was a BC basketball player named Jim Cassane, who was a very good player who I think if he had gotten more serious about it would have been in the NBA. He was really a good athlete. But anyway, he was from Chaminade. That's how I got introduced to the concept of Chaminade, absolutely.
Yeah, and you know who my brother used to be good friends with, who's 2 years younger than me and was a better basketball player than I was, but his best friend, really a kid he hung around with all the time and played with, was Jerry Nolan, who played at Boston College. Remember
Yes,
Jerry Nolan? Yes, and he used to live right around the block from us, and was a really good player and a heck of a schoolyard player. When I played against him, he was better than all of us, as a matter of fact, and we played with him all the time.
We had a succession of point guards down through the ages at BC, very admirable, starting with John Austin, and you mentioned Nolan, and we had Billy Evans, who was a terrific one, and then, of course, the ones that people would know much more, John Bagley, Michael Adams, Dana Barrows. That's pretty good for a school.
Very good. It's funny. The other thing I turned on, and this made me think of you because you probably chronicled his career as much as anybody, was how Bird arrived as the hope in Boston, how the whole thing, the time that Red put him in the stands as he signed and everything else, and how he arrived and how the team, how bad it was, and how how Rowe was and how terrible it was, and then all of a sudden here was Bird, and how Bird not only transformed the Celtics but transformed the league. But Bob lived those days and was as close to Bird as anybody there, obviously, as being the guy who was the the preeminent writer about the Celtics. But it was fascinating to watch that again, to see how Bird just revolutionized that city after having so much great basketball. And recently, Bob, I was sitting in a pub in Palm Beach, took my family out to dinner, and who comes up? John Havlicek's son. And yes, and said, because I knew his mom, and I knew John, obviously, and John obviously just passed away, and I had a dog named Hondo, as a matter of fact, because we loved Havlicek, and I just saw him recently in Palm Beach. So, you think of the Celtics, but Bird's arrival and the transformation of that team is amazing stuff. It really is.
Well, first of all, this conversation is getting creepily eerie in terms of cross-references, because tomorrow would be John Havlicek's 80th birthday.
Wow.
He would have been 80 tomorrow, and of course he passed away last year.
Yep.
And he's sort of fallen a little bit through the cracks of NBA history, and
not fairly either, too. I mean, terribly.
He was every bit the player that Oscar Robertson and Jerry West were.
Yep.
They have a little more of a higher cachet. One of the problems is he played with Russell, and then anyway.
But Bob, let's be honest. West, Baylor, Havlicek have been especially West and Oscar, Baylor, Havlicek, that whole group has been treated terribly historically in the last 20 years. Absolutely. They've almost been forgotten. I try to tell people on the show all the time, you don't realize how good John Havlicek was. You don't realize how good Jerry West was, or Oscar, or Elgin Baylor, who people don't even know anything about.
You're preaching to the choir with Baylor. Elgin Baylor invented modern individual basketball moves. Elgin Baylor took basketball from a game that was strictly horizontal and only slightly vertical, and made it strictly and made it horizontal. And it was you can't overstate his importance in the history of basketball. And you're right. And from Elgin Baylor, the lineage goes Dr. J and Michael and LeBron. That's the lineage of that type of player. And so you're absolutely.
How about Bird, though? Let's get back to Bird's impact.
Bird, yeah. Well, obviously, I was privileged to be here. Just luck of history that Larry Bird popped into my life 10 years into my career in 1979. I started covering the Celtics in 1969-70. And I always say it this way. It was as if I had signed up for an art course but didn't know who the professor was. And on the first day of class, in walked the professor. It was Michelangelo. Because Larry Bird appeared for me, Bob Ryan, who loved basketball and I think appreciated a lot of things about it. And he was the individual microcosm of everything that was good about basketball. And then to become friendly with him, wind up doing a book with him, to see him play out that career, it was extraordinary. Now, that first year, you're right, they went from 29 wins to 61. Now, it wasn't just Larry. He was the number one reason. But in that year, they hired a real coach, Bill Fitch, because the previous coach had been a player coach who didn't even want the job, with Dave Cowens. They also got a healthy, tiny Archibald back after he had that Achilles injury and was really not much of a player the year before.
Yep.
They signed M.L. Carr, who had led the league in minutes played the year before as a free agent from Detroit, and they had an extra draft choice named Gerald Henderson, who turned out to be a very useful player for them.
Very solid.
So all those things happened. Bird was obviously the number one reason. He was Rookie of the Year. They went from 29 to 61, extraordinary jump, and they wound up losing in the playoffs to Philly, which was fair and square. But you're right. He captivated Boston. He became, so much more than just a great player, but a symbol. Yeah, he was, and I'm just eternally grateful that I was able to be on the ground.
Well, it's amazing that you could have, and we're talking with Bob Ryan, that you could have Cousy, Russell, Havlicek, Sam Jones, Casey Jones, Tommy Heinsohn, go down the line, and then have this renaissance, and a very good Dave Cowens too. I mean, but then have this renaissance with Bird, where it's almost like another wave came across. I mean, after having all that greatness, I mean, Bill Russell, who never lost. I mean, what Cousy meant to you guys and to basketball, and then obviously all the other great players, including Havlicek, and then to have the legacy of that and the length of that, the amazing amount of success. And then have Bird come in and almost start another whole wave of it is amazing. It really is.
They took it to a whole. Look, the table had been set, but they took it. But it was never a basketball town. You know this.
Yep.
Most people on the outside don't know this. It was never a basketball town. It was a hockey town.
Yep.
And yes, Russell won the 11 championships, and yes, Havlicek and Cowens won 2 more in 74 and 76. But it still had not been the predominant winter sports interest in Boston, because concurrent with the 70s rise of the Celtics was the great big bad Bruins and Bobby Orr, who's the greatest hockey player of all time, and don't let anybody tell you any different. But anyway, yes, you're right. And that's the only time in Boston sports history that from 1979 through 1988, that period of time, or roughly, when the Celtics were the number one team in town. They were bigger than baseball. They were bigger, and the Patriots didn't matter at all in those days. And they even supplanted the Bruins by the '86 season. They were, and it's the only time in Boston history. It was a magical time to be a Boston a Celtics fan for sure. And Bird was the fulcrum, but obviously you had McHale, you had Robert Parrish, you had the big three. And then, of course, in 85, 86, you had the glorious addition of Bill Walton, giving them the most amazing and, I think, frankly, easily said, the greatest front court in NBA history. And the reason why I still believe that the 85, 86 Celtics are the best team of the pre-3-point mania era, I'm going to have to say we have to divide basketball into certain historical epochs, is that no team ever brought anything resembling a healthy Bill Walton off the bench.
Ridiculous.
There have been other great six men, including Havlicek himself and then McHale, but Bill Walton changed the game in a way each night, in a way that no sixth man, quote unquote, ever did in the history of basketball, and it was the greatest 1-2 center punch in the history of basketball, Parrish and Walton, and you'll never see anything like that again.
He's an all-time great who you're utilizing as a backup. I mean, when healthy,
right.
an all-time great.
Willingly, and you know what he did? He came to Boston, and he was so thrilled and happy. And the first thing he did was to go to Robert Parrish's house, and go to Robert and say, "Look, I'm not here to take your job. I'm here to support you." And just that was. It was important because Robert was a sensitive person, and he's probably thinking, "What's going on here?" Well, as it turned out, they couldn't have had a better partnership. And the daily practices, Mike, they will all tell you were some of the most phenomenal things.
Had to be. I mean, you had guys who were as technically pure in basketball as anyone could ever be in Bird and Walton. So I mean, and Walton isn't even the boss on that team like he always was in UCLA. I mean, he's an extra guy. I mean, that's unbelievable because of Bird. We're talking with Bob Bryant. Bob, how about let's leave Williams out of this because he's a generation before onto himself. So Brady Orr's older, but he still has an incredible appeal, obviously, to everyone in Boston. Bird, Big Papi, all four. They're on four different street corners. Who gets the most attention now? Is it? I mean, they're all different sports. They obviously we know where Brady is at the moment, but how about all four of them on a given day right now? I mean, does time play into it, or
yes, totally today?
Because Orr's probably more kids named after Bobby Orr in Boston than anybody else.
But the man of the 21st century is Brady, and Brady has done, because you realize that before Brady, they were the only team in the National Football League whose best player by acclamation was not a skill position player. They were so deficient in star power and in skill positions. Every other team in the league, if you took a poll in 2000 or even and said, who's your best player? Who's your famous player? And every other team would have had a quarterback or a running back.
And you had John Hannah.
Except the Patriots. Right. It would have been number 73, right. John Hannah.
Yep.
And there wouldn't have been any argument about that.
He's an all-time great player, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, but that, and now, and then comes Tom Brady. Here comes Tom Brady. So, yes, the answer to your question is it would be Tom Brady today. For people over 65, it would be Orr with Bird on the rail. Okay, that's the order. And of course, for people over 80, it would be the Thumper. It would still be Teddy. He still has a tunnel named after him here, and is revered. And baseball has its particular place in Boston. But you'd be totally unrealistic not to give Brady his due with what he has done and how the mark he has left in this town. And so for anybody under 60.
How stunned was the town that Brady left?
It depends. If they were doing their homework, if they were paying attention, they wouldn't be stunned. They'd be disappointed. You could see. I have a mixed sports metaphor, Mike. He was taking a really good walking lead off first base to head to the next destination, wherever that was going to be. It was so clear. And so it was the only question at the end was where it was going to be. No, he clearly left indicators that he was ready to leave Boston.
I always thought that Kraft would play, and I didn't know how Belichick would play it, and I didn't think he'd be very sentimental. But I always thought that Kraft would be the guy who would play matchmaker at the end and would get the deal done. I was surprised that wasn't the case, unless they had already decided they were not going to pay him. I guess maybe they had already decided that.
I agree with you. If you asked me, if we had this discussion a year ago, I would have said Bob Kraft is not going to let this happen. He's a surrogate son.
He loved him.
He's not going to let it happen. but it did happen. And then I had for a while I was saying to everybody, I mean, I'm talking about going back, right in the immediate aftermath last month. I was saying to everybody, well, if Belichick had gone to Kraft and said, I gotta have him, I want him, I don't want to lose him, I'm going to die with him, I must have him, then Kraft would have paid him. And of course Belichick did not do that. But now I'm reassessing. I think Kraft was apparently ready to let it happen. I guess we don't know the whole truth. And the one person we know of the three that we haven't heard anything from, of course, is Belichick. Is he saving it for the ultimate tell-all? I don't know.
No, I don't think there'll ever be one, to be honest with you.
I don't think there will be.
No.
But I think we haven't heard from him. Tom is making it clear he's looking forward to a new challenge, and there's an implication there that he was tired of Belichick, and we were wondering about that. We're definitely wondering about that. But Belichick he gave the pro forma tribute to Tom, yeah. But he never said, he didn't go so far as to say, I can't live without him next year. He didn't say that.
No, and nor would he. I don't think it's in him, to be honest with you. And also, he probably thought Brady had slipped, and Brady has slipped a little. I mean,
it's inevitable.
He's not a kid anymore. He's not a kid anymore.
It's difficult to get the full assessment last year because there's a lack of weaponry, which has been well documented. You know it. You can tell what they didn't have, starting with no viable tight end. And then in the end, the one great reliable receiver was hurt, and not himself, Edelman. And the only thing he really had in the end was James White coming out of the backfield. And so he didn't have much to work with. We know that. But on top of that, there were missed throws, there were bad throws, there was clear slippage of talent. Although Brady insists that he has lost nothing. As recently as yesterday, I read a new interview with him in which he's saying that he's got the full range of his skills. Hi, Tom. This is your chance to prove it.
And he's got good weapons too. He does have good weapons.
Yeah, he's got good weaponry. They're much better on paper
and a quarterback-friendly coach. A very quarterback-friendly coach. He's a gambling offensive coach. That's who he is. So he's going to let him throw the ball.
He's also a very different personality. And maybe Tom, after 20 years, is ready for a new one.
Oh, he'll like him. Yeah, he'll like him.
Opposite in the NFL of today. Except maybe Pete Carroll, the ultimate, goody two-shoes players coach, than Bruce Arians, who's definitely a people person, as opposed to Bill Belichick. And you mentioned the lack of sentiment, and you're so right. About 10 years ago, when the pattern was emerging, and there goes Malloy, and there goes Seymour, and there goes this guy, and Vrabel eventually, and we're going, will there be an exception? Will there be any ounce of sentiment involved when the time comes for Tom? And of course, the clear answer was no.
No, and it never. There's a robotic nature to that. I just think that's part of who he is. And it'll be interesting to see. It'll be fascinating to see how they both do. It really will. I mean, as to which one does better. As a matter of fact, Tampa has a lot of holes on the other side of the ball, which they got to fix, which we'll see. They're going to be a good offensive team, but it's going to be interesting to see what exactly the Pats wind up with this year. I mean, they'll be a good defense. They'll be a good defense, but we'll see what they are on the other side of the ball.
If only they were on the schedule this year, but they're not until next year. And
what about his? Had he, in your mind, had he reached the status of a Bird or an Orr or a Williams in town? Was he as big as they were?
Positively, because in fact, the number one story of my entire career here in Boston is the rise of the Patriots from clear fourth place in the local pecking order to one. And the Red Sox were one for a century and plus, well over a century, but you can't argue that any longer. The Patriots, and they've elevated themselves in this town. Now we'll see what happens post Belichick and post Brady and eventually post Belichick. But now everything's clouded because of the situation that we're living in. No one knows what state sports are going to come back. Right. We don't know which sport will suffer the most from the lack of patronage. We don't know any of these things, so it's all bets are off, and we don't have any idea about what we're going to be talking about in 2021 or 25 or 27.
Are you pro? Are you pro the Arizona?
Brady is number one.
Are you pro the Arizona since you went there?
No.
Do you like now? Listen.
I think it's impractical.
It's very impractical. How about 7-inning game doubleheaders? I'm
okay with that. If they were to get look, in the event, and once again, none of us know, in the event that they could feasibly construct a limited baseball season, I would have no problem in the circumstances that we would be living in with 7-inning doubleheaders in baseball. In fact, I would hope that they would not be day-night split doubleheaders, but that's probably asking for too much.
No, they won't be.
They'll
be regular doubleheaders, I think, because they don't care about admission here. And
well, then, all right. But I would. But if they chose to go, if they were,
you're going to have 20-man pitching staff, though. That's the thing.
I know that's the only problem. The games would be
they're going to be watered down. You're going to be hitting off a lot of AAA pitchers because each team's going to have a ton of pitchers on the team.
Well, that's right. The way that they have allowed pitching to evolve, or they chose to allow.
Yeah, and they're talking about having massively expanded rosters. I had Bobby V on the other day. Bobby says, "Hey, these teams are going to have 15, 17 pitchers on these teams."
My God, I cringe at the thought. I love baseball. Number one. It's been part of my life since 1951, for God's sake. But I even that before that, I guess. But I cringe at that thought. I mean, baseball has baseball. Look, no sport needed this problem, but baseball was under attack anyway. Baseball was under legitimate attack and scrutiny for the ridiculous length of the games and the way the game has evolved and the way they play the game now and the shifting and all the stuff that was distorting the game that we once loved and it didn't need any. And it's the last thing it needs is a wholesale revolution, I think.
And now you're talking about. I mean, some of the stuff we're talking about, Brian. Electric strike zone. No mound visits, mic'd players, 7-inning doubleheaders, teams sitting in the stands so they can sit 6 feet apart.
No, I don't know when. It's all fine. We can speculate. We can concoct all these scenarios. But until the health authorities, the proper people, tell people that it's okay for all of us to congregate in any form of that nature, or for players to get together of that nature, and even if you're talking about playing in empty stands in any sport that we're talking about, there's support personnel involved. There's myriad issues involved. They're talking about isolating people for weeks in time. There's families involved. Players aren't going to want to.
One positive test throws the whole thing up in the air, too.
Yeah.
One positive test.
Right. I mean, it's not feasible. I don't even want to entertain. I'm not, people, we're all, we all want something to talk about, but I mean, the fact of the matter is that it's really almost drivel to start speculating about what might happen until the authorities and the legitimate health authorities tell us where we are.
Well, how about the NBA plan? What was your thought about that? Having eight teams East, 8 teams West, and playing playoffs in almost seclusion too. I mean,
if the format, the NBA as opposed to the NHL has a very simple format playoff delineation now. We know who the 16 teams would be if we drew. But you don't know it in the NHL. I don't know how they would find out deciding.
I don't know how it's going to work for hockey anyway. I think hockey's in a tough place. Yes,
it's clear.
Absolutely.
They've got a nice line drawn in both conferences. We know who the 8. But in terms of sequestering people for quarantining, whatever word you want to use, in one place for weeks at a time, guys got families. I don't think they're going to go for that. No, all these ideas are I'm not. I'm just not on board with almost any of them.
Problem is that money talks. You know how it is. I mean, they're trying to get TV revenue back. Yeah, they're trying to get TV. Trying to squeeze some revenue out of these seasons.
It's so incredibly complicated. And it is, and it wears you out.
How much have you missed sports unbelievably, or has it been not as bad as you thought it would be?
I haven't had a withdrawal symptom yet because as I said, I am a reader. I'm a huge reader. I've knocked off 3 books in a very short period of time, and as this thing's going on, and I'm ready to start on the next one tonight. I still haven't exhausted the possibilities of what's available to get myself involved in some of these programs on TV that on your computer. There's all kinds of stuff ahead of me. I'm coping so far. I really am, and I'm feeling okay. My wife and I feel okay.
Which is key. You got this.
Yeah,
you got to make.
I mean, of course, it's I mean, Mike, if this was you. It's been my life. I mean, I was born into a sports family. My father was involved in all aspects of sports in terms of promotion, marketing, etc. I never knew another life. I always say to people,
what was your father? Tell me about what did your father do?
Well, my father, Bill Ryan, was a noted guy in Trenton, New Jersey.
Right.
He was a promoter, was a marketer. He helped form a basketball league back in the late right after the war, a semi-professional kind of league.
Right.
He was involved with the Trenton Giants Interstate League Class B baseball.
Right.
I was president when Willie Mays made his debut in 1950 in Trenton. I was at the game. That's what the family always told me. I was at because I went to all the games that year with the family. My father then went to Villanova as an assistant athletic director in 52 to 54.
Really, I didn't know that. So he was he was the AD at Villanova, huh?
Oh, yeah, and under Bud Dudley, and he created this idea, the grocery bowl, where if you bought $10 worth of groceries at the Acme Market, you got a free ticket to a Villanova game, and they sold out the municipal stadium, 90,000 people for Ole Miss and Kentucky and the likes of that. It was my father's promotion. But
so how did you not go to Villanova?
No, well, I wanted to at first, but my mother was a very wise woman in this regard, and she didn't want me to go to school that close to home. And I wound up going to BC, and she thought it was good for me to get away.
She was right.
I did.
She was right.
Yeah, very, very prescient. But I would say to people this, Mike.
So you grew up in Trenton, right? You grew up in Trenton.
A time in my life when we weren't at a game, going to a game, or getting ready to go to a game. That's my DNA.
And, well, mine too, from as far back as I can, and I don't have that background because I didn't have a father growing up. But I tell you, it's all I remember. I mean, to be honest with you, and I've missed it. You keep yourself busy, but I have missed it. The games, especially. I have to admit, I really missed the NCAA tournament because I love those 17 days. I love those days where there's wall-to-wall games and I can zero in on those teams and then, talk to a bunch of the coaches after the game. I always have a handful that I talk to after every game and, 3 or 4 that I follow and, that I know well and root for and stuff. Although Majerus was one of them. He's gone. But still, Jay Wright's one as an example. And I talk to every game and stuff. And, you have those and you follow the team through the tournament and stuff like that. And then you're right on to the Masters after that, which I love. So, and opening day is right there, jammed in the middle. So it's a great time of year. It's a time of year you look forward to. So I have to admit, it's left a void, but especially baseball, because baseball is a great companion for people every day. It really is. And as you get a little older, baseball's there. If you're around the house more, baseball's there every day. And baseball on the radio is great. It's great in the backyard. It's great at the pool. I mean, the whole thing. You miss it when it's there every day. And I've always been a guy that you follow baseball on a daily basis. I'm sure you do the same thing. And you have
would have
forever.
Been my 33rd Final Four. We were going.
Right.
And ever since I stopped,
you've been to more than I have. That's more than I've been to.
I officially retired from the Globe full time in 2012.
Right.
But I've continued to go to most of the subsequent Final Fours because, like you, it's one of my favorite things on the whole, if not the single favorite thing in this whole sports calendar. I do miss the March Madness. There's no doubt. I do miss being. We would have been the championship game.
Yep.
Would have been last night.
Last night, as a matter of fact. Absolutely.
Yeah. And of course I think about that. I think about that a lot. Oh, sure. There's things, no question. This is a particularly vibrant period of time. This in the fall, I love when everything is going on at once, and all 4 sports are in 3 of the 4 are in vogue, and in this fall, you got all 4 at one point.
And this is the craziest thing we've ever lived through. Even 9/11 wasn't like this. This is the strangest. I mean, because you know what? We're sitting here today. We're about, I don't know how many days into this, 20-something days, whatever it is that we've been in the house, but we don't even have an answer yet. So we don't even have a direction yet.
Not even
so,
close.
I mean, we don't have any answers. At least on 9/11, we were back to being directed. We were at a game 11 days later. I remember the Mets asked Dog and I to go in and do the program from Shea Stadium that day so that they felt that, that we would calm everybody down, that it would be, a day, it would be important that they'd hear us on the air. Fred called me and asked us to go in there that day. I still remember it like it was yesterday. Piazza hits the home run, and the city was so united, and the world was so united, as we know. But this is very different, very
totally different because that sports was the classic healer, and now
yes.
we're all losing it. And And it's not just, the thing is, we were talking about sports, but just it's so much, every part of the entertainment world, the musicians who aren't going to get paid with the gigs that are canceled, the theaters, the local
Broadway,
theaters,
Broadway,
that are all across the country.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of, the sports bars, but back to the other kinds of entertainment. It's sports, it's music, it's entertainment of every form, and that we don't have, and that people are losing their livelihoods are threatened. No, we haven't been in the country. We've never ever. We had world wars. Yes, that was but we've never been through anything of this nature. And we have no idea how we're going to come out of it. But traditionally Americans have learned how to pull together and do that. And let's only hope that we've got the proper leadership to get us through it.
Well, listen, good to talk to you. Be well. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks very much for a couple minutes. Thank you very much. Bob Ryan, back after this. We'll be right back.